Dottie, I'm just getting ready to start the meeting, and I just made you a co-host. Can you be the noise police?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I'll let people in.
All right, sounds good. All right. All right, Bill, we're just getting ready to start. So,
Yep.
Welcome everybody. This is the Hyde Park Book Club. In the interest of keeping the noise down, everybody's been muted on entry. The session is being recorded and will be posted to the Hyde Park Historical Society website sometime later this week. We do have live captioning activated. So if you can't see that, please go to the bottom of your screen and activate it. Bill will be making a presentation, after which there will be a discussion. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them in chat, which I have activated. So anyway, I'm going to introduce Bill Swislow, who is a founder and former executive at cars.com. He's a writer and art collector who operates the website interestingideas.com. He and photographer Aaron Packer have spent over 20 years documenting the artwork treasure on our beloved Lake Michigan, much of which has been destroyed by the introduction of new concrete revetments up and down the lakefront. But if you looked at the book, some of this artwork is truly amazing. Some of it's funky and some of it's all interesting. About 2 years ago, Bill joined the Hyde Park Historical Society for a program on these revetments, and we're happy to welcome him back for a discussion of his recently published book, which I will show you all. There we go, Lakefront Anonymous. For those of you interested in seeing the revetments up close and personal, Bill will be doing guided tours of the revetments at Promontory Point Park on May 28th and May 29th in conjunction with International Promontory Point Day. We will be publishing the details in the near future. We're still getting the times and everything set. So,
are you going to be sending
Bill,
us emails? You'll be sending us emails,
Yeah.
or they'll be on the website?
both.
Okay.
The way we usually do it. So you should, Jean, you should get it. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Bill at this point. And Bill, you can, I'm going to put you on speaker view. And you can share your screen with everybody and let's get going.
Okay. Okay, looks good. Okay, so hopefully this will be an improvement from the dreary start of our week, because talking about the lakefront. For those of you who might have seen the presentation that I did a couple of years ago, there are some, this is built off of that, but there's a lot of new, let's say, new material. So it's not exactly the same thing. And I'll go through these slides as quickly as I can. They're mostly pictures to show what this great virtual museum that hardly anyone knows about looks like. So I just need to click on that. So there's our beloved Promontory Point. And as many of you will know some of the background here about the revetments, which were put in place starting about 100 years ago, made of limestone mostly to protect the shoreline from the water. What I like to think about is how many millions of people over the last century have really taken advantage of these structures to play. You know, this picture from Hyde Park is the Chicago we like to think we are, diverse and relaxed and, you know, enjoying the lakefront. Now, what interests me, or got me interested in particular, was this idea that some of those people hanging on the lakefront left behind this legacy. And you can see here this is from the beach house at the Morgan Shoal area. You can see in front, in the foreground, one of these rocks that's covered with names. That's what it looks like from the other side. And to me, these rocks are a canvas that all these ordinary people, most of whom are unknown, left behind something of themselves, whether it was a creative drawing or in this case, their names. And it represents this collective monument, sort of spontaneously created to life at the lake. And it's impressive. Now, you know, our petroglyphs along Lake Michigan might make you think of the petroglyphs in the American Southwest or Hawaii, which is what you were seeing here from the Big Island. But these petroglyphs are centuries old, whereas our petroglyphs are modern. You know, you also, sometimes if you're in the woods, you might every once in a while come across dense groups of graffiti like this one. But they tend to be concentrated in very small areas. They're really where people shouldn't be doing graffiti. But in this case, they started carving their names on this rock in the 1840s. This is from downstate Illinois at Giant City State Park. But it has a feeling that's similar to some of the rocks we see on our own lakefront, which, as I say, sort of to me represent this collective work of art. So this is a rock that's near Foster Avenue Beach. There's about 40 names on this rock, all carved by different people, all people leaving behind this little trace of their identity. This rock has a date on the bottom. You can't really see it here, but it's from 1961. And we don't know what these carvers thought they were doing or what they intended, but you know, together they made something that I think is important. And they made a lot of them. So the carvings stretch all the way from Calumet Park Beach on the Indiana state line, really all the way up, even up to Loyola Park on the far north side, although mostly they stop at Hollywood Beach or Osterman Beach. But there are thousands of these carvings along Lake Michigan. There used to be more thousands than there are now, and we'll talk about that. But this is something that's unique in the world. You know, I've done a fair amount of looking to figure out, is there anything like this in other cities? Because you would think there would be. And I found no evidence that there's anything like this kind of, you know, creative efflorescence, if you will, anywhere else in the world. I mean, there are places where you'll find a handful of carvings that spontaneously appeared. And then you'll have places like Sydney, Australia, where you have ancient petroglyphs near the city, but nothing like this, where an entire coastline of a major city is covered with modern carvings. And we'll start looking at some of them. You know, and one of the main points that I like to make when I talk about these carvings is this idea that art can be found anywhere. You know, this is an example of a carving of a mermaid at Foster Beach. You know, she's seated, she's leaning back on her hand, and on the lower left, you can see her tail. Really quite beautiful, quite delicate, just someone's active imagination. But the nature of these carvings is that art can be found anywhere, but it can be hard to see. And so this is the same mermaid carving from a different angle, and that's the angle at which most people would see it. And you can tell most people aren't going to notice it. And I don't blame them. I mean, it can be hard to find them, which is one reason why, and this is important, that these carvings are virtually unknown. Up until the last few years, when I started trying to, you know, doing these presentations and ultimately created a book, there were very, very few mentions of these carvings in any media that I can find. They had a little bit of attention in 1992 when my partner in the book, Aaron Packer, who introduced me to these carvings back then, had a show at the Cultural Center of his photographs of the carvings. So it got some attention. A few articles were written then, and then nothing before and nothing after. So the carvings really have remained unknown. But if you do look down, you might see a foot like this one, which is at Rainbow Beach. You might see a hand at Foster Beach. This hand is about 2 feet tall. I love the way that the pinky is bent, by the way. You might notice that detail. A lot of these carvings do have wonderful details like that. You might see a tribute to the moon landing. Although this spectacular carving you would only see if you had a time machine, because this was at Montrose Harbor and it was destroyed when the Army Corps of Engineers rebuilt the harbor there. But this is an amazing carving. I mean, this was very large, several feet wide. You know, the tribute to the moon landing. It was made by a carver named Helmut, who made some other spectacular carvings at Montrose Harbor, all destroyed in the early 2000s. This is another one probably at Montrose Harbor, you know, this very nice carving of a dog. This just gives you some idea of the variety of stuff you'll see if you look down when you walk along the lake. You might see an interesting face or two. This face is actually the logo from Thor Heyerdahl's Kon-Tiki expedition, or it's an adaptation of that logo. This is near Montrose Beach. Or you might see 8 faces. This rock is about at 44th Street in the middle of a seating area, so it's away from the lake. It's interesting, it has a tree on the right, and on the left it looks like a hand holding a vacuum cleaner, although I can't tell for sure. One of the things I love about this is these 5 faces here, because I think what we're seeing, at least best I can interpret, you're seeing Mo, Larry, Curly.
You're going to be even hotter.
You're going to run around like you do in the winter, and you're going to wear sweatpants and sweatshirt and be in a tank top or a dress like this going, my moo-moo. I would never wear moo-moo.
Appropriate for the Three Stooges. Mo, Larry, Curly, Shemp. And
I'll wear something
this,
like this. You're like, oh.
this one on the right.
Gary, one of the,
I think
you know how you got me that.
Can we mute? Okay. I think the one on the right is an actor named Vernon Dent, who was always the fall guy in the Three Stooges shows. But anyway,
came out here and she peed, but I didn't see her poop.
That's my theory. Okay. Anyways, let's keep going. You'll see a lot of names like Bill Adler, that's at Morgan Shoal, or you'll see a lot of hearts, like this pair of hearts. That's on a rock that's behind La Rabida Hospital, which we'll get back to if we have time. And then you may see some weird messages like this one, this tribute to Jose Franco, but eternal activity without action, probably from Montrose Harbor and definitely lost. Or this one, which is not lost, this is at Foster Beach, with that interesting TV set on the left with Nixon, and then the crosses of Calvary, and someone, probably not the cross carver, wrote dead haha underneath, and then a very realistic fish. But exactly what these carvers intended, particularly the Nixon carver, is anyone's guess. But as it happens, Foster Beach is an example of a place where there is a large concentration of carvings. 20 blocks on the north end of Foster Beach have more than 30 carvings on them. And I think it's because the carvings are about where people hung out. And I think people hung out at the north end of Foster Beach. And so they carved. There's this little bathing beauty that's up there. This is about 3 inches high. This is probably my favorite of all the lakefront carvings. I just think it's so sweet and so nicely executed. This plaque is up there, and it's kind of hard to read it. But what I can tell you is there's 2 fish. To the right of the 2 fish is a torso. The lower right is a squirrel eating an acorn. And then the date is 1958, which is when Foster Beach actually opened to the public. So it's kind of the whole beach experience that someone carved in one plaque on a rock out in the middle of nowhere for no recognition, just for the sake of doing it. But there's something else about Foster Beach I need to mention. You should have you probably recognize this song, the big hit from Grease, right? Summer Nights. Well, most of you may know that Grease was originally set in Chicago. It was written by this guy named Jim Jacobs. And this is a picture of Jim Jacobs from 1960 at Foster Avenue Beach, which is one of the places where the kids in Grease hung out. And the reason why I bring this up is because of the lyrics from that song, Summer Nights, started life as a different song called Foster Avenue Beach. They improved it when they made it Summer Nights, but basically when Grease went to Broadway, they stripped out Chicago. But these lines are just so perfect. He painted on the rocks a summer souvenir on Foster Beach. If you walk by the water, you can see the big red heart with 2 names inside. Now, this Pat and Jim carving, remember, Jim Jacobs was the playwright, is at Foster Beach. It's a carving, not a painting, and I have no way of knowing that it has anything to do with Jim Jacobs, but I like to think it does anyways. But that's the kids in Greece. That was one love story, but there are a lot of love stories along the lake. I'll just share a couple of the good ones. Kathy and Buzz is what this one says. This is at Rainbow Beach. The Buzz in that carving is Buzz and Garo. You probably can't see it. It's not, it's a little hard to read, but the carving on this rock above the no diving painting says Buzz and Garo, and it says 1963-4-5678. So Buzz was a lifeguard. He went to Leo High School, and he was a lifeguard at Rainbow Beach, started in 1963. And he was a lifeguard every year through 1968. And what he said is that the lifeguards had some hammers and chisels. They just would pass them around. And at Rainbow Beach, on the rocks there, which are on the south and the north end of the beach, you can see there's a whole bunch of these names with the years chiseled in the rocks and the hyphens. The nice thing about Buzz, and here he is again, this is that Kathy and Buzz carving, is when I talked to Buzz, and Buzz lives in Goshen, New York. I found him through the Rotary Club there. But when I talked to him about this, he told me that Kathy was across the room from him. So, a happy love story there. The other happy love story I like to talk about is at Promontory Point. So we have two guys, Bob Nacktree and Cliff Weaver. And Bob and Cliff were freshmen at the U of C. And the late spring, probably around now in 1964, they went out to the point early in the morning and put their names and their girlfriends' names on the rocks there. They used hammers and chisels that belonged to Bob's father. Bob said it took a few hours, and he said he thought his work was very amateurish. And I'll tell you, Cliff got the better location because he's got this beautiful location overlooking the lake. But this is another case where Bob Nacktree and Linda Turner are still married, as are Cliff Weaver and Donna Florence. So carving into the rocks, and maybe that gives you a good chance of sticking together. Here's the spot, by the way, on the lower right where you can see the Cliff and Bob carvings at that section of the point there. But back to Rainbow Beach. This one I only just did the research on this one. Rick Pertado, and you can see that Rick became a lifeguard in 1957 and actually stopped the year before Buzz and Garo started. So he was probably 14 when he began as a lifeguard at Rainbow Beach. But what's great about Rick Pertado is that Rick was in the class of 1961 at Chicago Vocational High School, and he was on the championship football team that year. And I think you can see Rick here is third from left, but if you go across the gutter, you'll see why it was the champion football team, that's Rich Butkus, who we all know as Dick, was on that team. And apparently Rich and Dick remained friends after that, and were sort of lifelong friends. And Rich was also, he was in swimming, he did basketball at the school, and importantly, he was a lunchroom guard. But just a little bit of the history, another Rainbow Beach carver was someone named Guy Lazzara. He was not a lifeguard. Guy lives in the Chicago suburbs, but in the 1950s, he was a steel worker at Southworks. And he told me he just went to Rainbow Beach to get away from work. And he said just one day he decided he wanted to do something there and try something. And so he created this carving with his name, that's his birthday underneath. And on the left is a self-portrait. And he wasn't an artist, he didn't become an artist, because if he was an artist, he would have known that the portrait should be looking to the right, not the left. But like most carvers, he certainly didn't think what he was doing was art. But if you look at that self-portrait, you can kind of see it's clearly a beautiful portrait of a young man. Now, he told me that it was vandalized not long after he carved it. So that's why you can see it's kind of messed up, but you can see it's still, the artistry comes through of, here's a young man, on the lakefront, just killing time and, creating a beautiful self-portrait. Before we leave Rainbow Beach, these are just one of the favorite scenes from that site. The clown face on the left and that little skull on the right, I just think are, great, just wonderful carvings that, again, people just did to pass the time, no recognition. Now, The carvers I just talked about, I was able to identify mostly because of their names. They had unusual enough names that I could track them down. The vast majority of carvings don't have any names associated to them and are otherwise anonymous. This is the one exception, and the one time, other than that Aaron Packer show I mentioned, that the carvings got some attention was for this mermaid. Now, this mermaid today sits just on the south end of Oakwood, just past the south end of Oakwood Beach. It was originally carved in 1986 at 39th Street in the lake, and when they ripped up the revetments there, this was the one carving they saved. But this was the one carver. The carvers who created this actually got recognition, and that's because in 2000, the Chicago Sun-Times did a story about the mystery mermaid and how no one knew where it came from. They looked at the archives and they could not no one could figure out who did it or where it came from. But when that story appeared, there's a close-up on the mermaid. When that story appeared, which is on the left of this slide, the daughter of one of the carvers went to the Sun-Times and said, I was the model for that carving. The carver was my dad, and her dad is an artist named Roman Villarreal, who is actually another former steel worker, self-taught stone carver, who in 1986 with 3 friends, they just decided they wanted to try something. They wanted to do something together, and there's a lot of rock at the lake. And so with another stone carver from Mexico and a couple of friends, they went out and they made this carving. Roman is still active in Chicago. He's got carvings in a number of parks around the city, including these little animals, which are at Margate Park up on the north side. He paints, he's very prolific. There he is in his studio, which is under the Skyway, basically, or almost under the Skyway with some of his other stonework. We're actually having a retrospective of Roman's art at my Intuit Museum opening in June. So, if you're interested, he's very active in sort of the community arts world on the far south side. Things do happen. You may have remembered that mermaid in the first picture was facing up. She's now on her side. According to Roman, that's because the waves and the freeze thaw cycle actually tipped this ginormous, quarry stone onto its side over the winter in 2020, or the winter of 2020, 2021. So things do happen. So I'm on the subject of, Roman is Mexican-American. His partner was a carver from Mexico. The largest group of carvings by a single hand all have a Mexican theme. And these are a dozen carvings that are north and south of Foster Avenue Beach that were made in the mid-1990s by a person whose identity is unknown, even though I saw him at work myself in the mid-1990s. He was Hispanic. He was using, I think, a big sharpened nail and a hammer, and he created a dozen really, really intricate carvings like this one, which I only discovered recently. These carvings are almost all, the ones I could identify, but probably all of them are based on actual carvings from Mayan ruins. So there's that one. This is the original. So this is a detail from the Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza in Mexico. And although this guy's carvings are a little bit simplified, not by much, but he clearly was using these as models. Here's another example. This is the one on top is his carving. And it's typical in that it's really complicated. It's actually pretty hard to read, which is typical of his work, very elaborate, very detailed. But you can see below, you can see the similarity. This is from, this is a Maya bird deity from Palenque, however it's pronounced. I'm not very good with that. But, it's a beautiful carving. One of the things to notice is this is the bird deity. There's a little hummingbird there flying up above. But below it, this is the drawing of the carving from Mexico, the actual Mayan carving. And just for what it's worth, our guy didn't have enough room to do the whole thing because this is just a tiny detail from a much bigger carving. But it's amazing that he did all these in basically 1995, 1996 using hand tools. And as far as I could tell, by himself. One more of his. So you can see there's a face in the middle and then a headdress. This carving is 9 feet wide. And there it is. There's the detail of the face. And there it is at the bottom. This is also from the Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza and part of a much bigger carving. But there are lots and lots of symbols along the lakefront. This is from the Morgan Shoal area, the male-female symbol, this peace symbol, a lot of peace symbols up and down the lake. I like to tell people, I've done a count, and there are more peace symbols than swastikas. So, I take that as favorable. This one is at Fullerton Avenue in the lake, and as are these Egyptian symbols. More recent carvings than some of the ones we've been looking at and we'll be looking at shortly. But very nicely done, pretty large scale. And these are in the same area. So Fullerton Avenue and the lake, where Fullerton Avenue, these boulders were installed starting in 1925. And then in 2015, as part of that bigger lakefront protection project, which I'll talk about more, and some of you know about anyways, they were torn out. But they were torn out as part of a project to expand the lake, expand the park. And they did some landfill. This is at Fullerton Avenue. And they created new parkland. And the landscape architect tried to save as many of the rocks with carvings as she could. And then she reinstalled them, like these two, which they called the hair washers, which look a little older, in seating areas and other areas in the park. The hair washers, you can't really see them, but they're here at the lower left. That peace sign is over here to the right. And what she did there will be relevant when I get toward the end of this presentation and talk a little bit about Morgan Shoal. But what I like to emphasize when I talk about this is that these stone carvings exist because our lakefront exists. And the lakefront in its current form is really what I would call the city's greatest cultural achievement, which is that our lakefront was preserved free from industrial and commercial use, which, if you think about Chicago's reputation, is a weird thing. Chicago is this city that was always all about commerce. It's always viewed as corrupt and beholden to powerful special interests. Yet those special interests, most notably the Illinois Central Railroad, was never able to line our lakefront with docks and wharves and factories and warehouses. Now, I think that's, well, I like to say it's because of the 4 R's, and the 4 R's are the river, the river, the railroad, riparian rights. There's a 4th R somewhere, which I have forgotten. The reason is that when Chicago was formed, the original docks were in the river, not on the lake. And the Illinois Central Railroad, as you may know, was actually built on the lake, over the water, going up to the Chicago River. And riparian rights are the rights of landowners over the waterfront. And all of those put together led to the fact that through many years of litigation and maneuvering, that our lakefront was not industrialized. And it started really in 1836 or so, when the state of Illinois, the new state of Illinois, sent commissioners to Chicago. And when they mapped out, created the original sort of plats for Chicago, they specified that the lakefront was to be, at least downtown, was to be public ground, a common to remain forever open, clear, and free of any buildings or other obstructions whatsoever. Federal authorities had a similar declaration that the lakefront should be off limits to buildings. Now, that wouldn't have stuck, except there were so many years of politics and litigation, most famously litigation by Montgomery Ward, who was a special interest because he invented catalog retailing. He also had his offices on Michigan Avenue overlooking the lake, and he didn't want anything to obstruct his view, and he was litigious. So he filed many lawsuits in the early part of the 20th century to prevent projects from being built in Grand Park, with the exception of the Art Institute. But he really was able to block anything else. But it wasn't just Montgomery Ward. There was lots of litigation. But in the end, the result was that basically our lakefront was never industrialized, and it became parkland, which is truly remarkable, because in nearly every other city you will go to with a waterfront, if it's now parkland, it almost certainly wasn't 100 years ago. When waterfronts were almost everywhere, used for commercial reasons, for highways, for railroads. Ours wasn't. Oh yeah, and one of the reasons why too is that, of course, people hated the Illinois Central Railroad, and so no one wanted to see Illinois Central get its way with the lakefront. So that probably helped as well. But special interests weren't the only enemy of a publicly accessible lakefront. I mean, the lake is the biggest enemy of all. This is from 1901 or 02, I think. 1901, yeah. The Lake Michigan wrecking the lakefront. And again, 1917, another storm tears up the lakefront. 1929, another storm tears up the lakefront, another flood. 2020, the same story. It's been going on for over 100 years. Because our lakefront, as you may know, is artificial. It's almost all landfill, and the bits of it that aren't landfill are highly engineered. And the lake, I think, is just, always trying to take it back. So in the 1920s, they started this new approach to basically stopping the flooding and the erosion of the lakefront, and they built about 12 miles. I mean, ultimately 12 miles of these limestone revetments, and they used that approach into the 1950s, and they were pretty effective. Not entirely so, but pretty effective. Here's one you're all familiar with, Promontory Point in 1936. When they were finishing the installation of the revetments, and you can see the new landfill there. That's just, this created shoreline, and these revetments made these places like Promontory Point a perfect place for the carvers that I'm interested in to do their work. Unfortunately, these revetments in the older sections were built with wooden foundations, and this is a drawing of what that looked like. The problem was when the wood is covered with water, those foundations were adequate, but when the water levels fell, wood is exposed to air and it started to rot. And so what you started to see is these foundations started giving way and the rocks started tumbling into the water. There's our beautiful point. That's in pretty good shape. As you know, the north side of the point is not in as good a shape. It suffered more damage from the lake. So there was, areas that are much worse shape than Promontory Point. I mean, the one that we'll talk about in a couple of minutes is Morgan Shoal. But on the north side, some of the areas south of Montrose Harbor were really, really in bad shape. And so in the 2000s, as many of you know, the Army Corps of Engineers in the city started rebuilding the lakefront. And they rebuilt, there were about 12 miles of those limestone revetments. There are about 6 miles left, roughly speaking. So they destroyed about half of them. This is at Diversey Harbor. And this is a view looking north from Diversey Harbor of an area that was known as the Rocks. And the Rocks in the 80s and 90s were a major gathering place for the gay community, really beloved. And when people realized in Lakeview what was going to happen to the Rocks, they actually raised a ruckus, but unlike you folks in Hyde Park, they were not successful. And so these rocks were all removed and replaced with concrete and steel. About half of all the limestone was removed. It happens that at the Rocks, you can see lining the concrete revetment, there's about, I think 200 or 250 of the old limestone quarry stones are still there. And a few of those have really nice carvings on them, like this one, Drink to Me Only with Thine Eyes, O Sole Mio, this beautiful skull. But most of what was there was destroyed, and the concrete, this is from 2019, so this is already 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the concrete's already deteriorating. So, we all will be, I'm sure, happy to see that. But this was the Rocks before they were destroyed. And if you look here, what you can see is there were some carvings here, but mostly there was writing and painting. So on the lower left, that's a long poem by Walt Whitman. You can see some paintings in the distance, and the community there treasured them. And the reason, though, that line of 200 rocks were saved was because the alderman, still the alderman, Tom Tunney, went out one day with a friend and with a project manager for this construction project, and he identified rocks he wanted them to save. And so they saved about 200 of them. And he did it because a lot of these rocks had beautiful works of art on them, like this one, and works of art that were meaningful for the community that spent time there. So this one on the lower left is a tribute. You can see the years there to someone who died. They had social content in these paintings, and Tunney wanted some of them saved. And they did save a few, but the vast majority of the artwork there was destroyed, as it was elsewhere, which we'll talk about. So those are paintings. I just want to show, an example of a painting at Foster Beach. It's a pretty cool one. So this was painted in 1999. It's a tribute to dead rock or dead guitarists. So that's Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Jimi Hendrix, Frank Zappa, and Randy Rhoads, who was in Twisted Sister. However, these paintings die. So the guy who painted this, a guy named Adam Rotter, came back in 2016 and repainted this. This is when he had just repainted it. This is what it looked like 2 years later. This is Muddy Waters decaying. And he was actually back there this summer repainting it again, but he didn't finish. So Howlin' Wolf and Jimi Hendrix still need some work, as do the others. He also added B.B. King. Anyways, those are the paintings. Those are pretty recent, but the carvings go back at least to 1930 in the case of this rock. This is at Morgan Shoal. This is also at Morgan Shoal, June 21st, 1931. So these carvings have been there a long, long time. People have been doing this for a long time. Morgan Shoal happens to have the biggest concentration of surviving carvings, at least when I counted them a couple of years ago. I'm not sure that it can claim that anymore, and we'll see why in a minute. And I also I don't have too many more slides to go through, but I did want to talk a little bit about the threats, which some of you are very familiar with. This is a bathing beauty at Morgan Shoal. This one is just this Puritan winged skull with Frank underneath it. A fairly recent carving because it's in such good shape, or it was when I took this picture 4 years ago. Unfortunately, when I was out there last fall, you can't even tell, but Frank is now lying here underneath this rubble and this rock. So the wave action has just, Frank is probably lost for good, although, maybe he could be saved if someone were so inclined. This is another Morgan Shoal carving, a checkerboard, playable. I counted the squares. It was horizontal, and it's now falling into the lake. Morgan Shoal, again, extremely deteriorated. I'm sure you all know that, what terrible shape it's in. So this rock on the left has this sort of god and host of Adam and so on and so forth was here. There are probably about 350 or more carvings at Morgan Shoal. And unfortunately, they're all under threat. 3 of them, by the way, are brand new. These were made in the last probably year, the bee, the flower, and the cat. You can partly tell because of how white the carve marks are, but also because I know they weren't there as of 2 years ago. But it's all threatened. I think it's great. It is great that the city is going to revitalize that stretch of lakefront, which really isn't bad. Unlike Promontory Point, it's beyond sort of normal rehabilitation, or most of it is. They're going to, and that proposal is funded in the Lightfoot's budget to do some landfill, like they did at Lincoln Park, to add a little depth to the park there, and to make it a beautiful park. However, I think you folks in Hyde Park need to be aware of what the city is proposing in terms of lake access. I will note that in that Army Corps project in the early 2000s, the Army Corps of Engineers' original proposal was to do what are called slopestone revetments the length of the lakefront, basically replace all the limestone with boulders as the cheapest way to stop flooding and erosion. The city in the 1980s said, we won't stand for that. You cannot take away access to the lake from our parks. And so that's how we got the concrete and steel, which isn't great, but is better than what the Army Corps had proposed. And I just want to emphasize, essentially, that original Army Corps proposal is what the city is planning to do at Morgan Shoal. So this is one of the city's own renderings. And if you look here, there's this little park at that Pebble Beach area, this little beach, but the rest of this, the vast majority of that stretch is going to be what's called a slopestone revetment. And if you think it doesn't look too bad here, this is the city's other rendering that shows you what a slopestone revetment is. They did this for just a few blocks next to Waveland Golf Course at the north side. And what it means is if you're up here in the park, you cannot get anywhere near the water unless you're an adventure climber. And so I just think, folks should be aware that this is what the city is proposing. And if you care about it, this isn't about the carvings. My hope for the carvings is that, as they did at Lincoln Park, they will identify, and a little bit at the Belmont Rocks, they will identify the rocks that have really nice carvings on them and repurpose those carvings in the park. But this is not about that, but this is about access to the water, which basically will be blocked for the length of Morgan Shoal. So something to think about. But let's talk about Promontory Point, and then I have a few other carvings to show, and then we'll be done with the slide. So I don't need to give you guys the details of Promontory Point, just how great it is that you were able to preserve it in the original threat in the 2000s. And we know it's under threat now. And they're, to me, part of the argument for Morgan Shoal and for Promontory Point and the preservation approach is that there are these amazing carvings, in terms of the sort of the cultural heritage that Promontory Point represents, beyond the fact that, you guys know better than me, but I think it must be the largest intact WPA project left in Chicago. It also is lined with these wonderful carvings, like these beautiful carvings on the south side of the point. They're fading away. You can see on the one on the right is an oak leaf that's hard to see. They're not this distinct today because they're exposed to the weather. This is on the north side. It's just a funny carving here. Adolph lies as usual in Vamp 79th Street. And on top of that very carving, this is Susie's tomb, and there's Susie's head and feet. Just sort of this anonymous brilliance that these carvings represent. Back on the north side, these are much more recent carvings. This is from 1994 because it's dated. And this is the Blue Oyster Cult logo for those of us who didn't follow Blue Oyster Cult. And I wasn't aware of that until someone pointed it out to me. These mosaics were created in over the course of 2018. These are also on the north side of the point. If anyone knows the artist who did this, let me know, because I would love to talk to them. Back on the south side, there are a lot of these bathing beauty carvings, or, unfortunately, too fewer than there were just a few months ago, but I'll get to that in a second. This is like a Betty Grable type figure. My theory is that when the radar station that used to be on the point, that maybe that's why there are all these bathing beauties that were carved in that area by the guys manning the radar. But I love this carving. And then right next to her was this carving of these two seated bathing beauties, I think wearing sun hats or some kind of weird cap, but really, really, really well done. There they are, with the water there. That Betty Grable-ish figure is right there. Unfortunately, between October or November, when I was last there, and last month, this is where those two carvings are now. This is the Betty Grable carving, and those two seated figures have fallen into the water, into the lake. So you can swim up to them, I guess, and kind of see them, but they're in the process of being lost as well, which kind of lends urgency to the fact that, Promontory Point needs work, and it's a crime that the city has not maintained these revetments. And of course, not to get into the stuff you guys already care about in terms of preserving them rather than tearing them out. Just a few more carvings, but there are many more. A couple of profiles. These are on the south side. The Playboy Bunny, the artist didn't quite finish that one, and the Ace of Spades. I think the bunny is on the north side. I'm not sure where the Ace of Spades is. And then one other concentration, very small and compact, but very dense, in your vicinity, is behind La Rabida Hospital. It's a little bit challenging. The Promontory Point ones, they're easy to get to. The Morgan Shoal carvings, you have to be pretty brave to climb around. And you also, same for these ones behind La Rabida, but there are just great carvings back there, including probably the greatest single surviving group of carvings along the lake, on a par with that moon landing tribute. So if you look at this carving, you'll see it's a peace symbol, the peace sign. You got flowers, says peace. You got a butterfly, and best of all, it's hard to see, but on the left there's a bare foot. So it's the whole Summer of Love hippie package on one carving, on one rock behind La Rabida Hospital. There's also, these are all behind the hospital there. Al Loves Clara in 1967, Georgia and Doc, 1974. This rock with this is an actual compass carved into the rock, along with the hearts and the names. There's the compass. You can see north, south, east, west, probably carved in 1960, just says underneath. And, unfortunately, like many of these other sites, the compass is now falling into the water because the lake just pounds these rocks, and, no one maintains them. And That's what happens. But, the lake's damage takes, is over years. Unfortunately, the government's damage happens very quickly. These are all carvings from the Belmont, Montrose Harbor areas, and they're all lost. They're all, along with the moon landing tribute, these have all been destroyed and were just lost. Wherever they ended up dumping the rocks, that's where these are. Just many beautiful, beautiful carvings. The one on the left, these are from the area around Montrose Harbor. The one on the left obviously was very old from the style. The one on the right, fairly recent, 1977. Gone. Bathing Beauty's gone. This was the most anatomically correct Bathing Beauty. She's gone. You can see the scale here. This profile is gone. Another profile, I love the fact that he's wearing a beanie in this one. And then this one I used to call the Montrose Giant, also gone. This was a very large carving. The carver gave up. I think they were too ambitious, but someone, maybe the carver, maybe someone else gave this figure, a hand and a foot anyways. But they're gone. And it was the disappearance of these carvers that made me feel like of these carvings that the Army Corps was destroying, made me feel like, well, I better document the ones that are left. Of course, I was too late. Fortunately, my friend Aaron Packer had photographed a lot of carvings around Montrose Harbor and Belmont Harbor, and some at Promontory Point in the late 80s, early 90s. But by the time I got onto it, about half of the carvings had been lost, had been destroyed before I started really photographing them systematically. But I've gone all the way from Calumet Park at the Indiana line all the way north and walked every foot of limestone revetment and photographed every carving I've seen. And I can say that I don't know how many carvings there are because a lot of rocks have more than one carvings on them, but I've counted about 2,500 unique sort of photos of unique groups of carvings. So that's where I get the thousands and thousands of carvings that survive. And then there were thousands that were destroyed. So I started documenting them, and then it occurred to me a few years ago, well, what do I do with these photos, and how can I do something that maybe will help bring up the profile of these carvings, create some awareness, so that maybe the next time the city decides to do work on the lakefront, they won't just destroy them. And so that's when I decided to come up to publish a book, which is this book, Lakefront Anonymous, which Aaron and I worked on, came out last fall. I ended up self-publishing it. It has a somewhat narrow audience appeal. I mean, it appeals to people who care about vernacular and self-taught art, which is my background, and obviously appeals to people who are interested in the lakefront and parks, but a little narrow. And so it was, rather than knock my head against the commercial publishers or even university presses, I printed it myself, and it's been, it's sold pretty well. I mean, I went to a second printing at the beginning of this year. So, and a lot of the pictures we just saw are in the book, not quite all of them, but many of them are in the book, as well as more of the history and more of the background of the carving. So, that's the presentation. I probably went longer than I should for a book group, but certainly happy to take any questions, and, you guys are free to discuss or ask questions or what have you.
Right.
About
Well,
the book, about
Bill,
carving.
Bill, thank you so much. This has really been wonderful, and this is a great follow-up to the presentation you did for us 2 years ago. Could you put us all back on, stop sharing your screen at this point?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I should say, you can, if you haven't bought the book and you want to, you can go to lakefrontanonymous.com, among other places, and that goes to my website, and you can buy the book there, or it's on Amazon as well. It's not in too many bookstores, but that's partly because of the economics of bookstores and publishing.
Right. And I think that the link from Amazon takes you right back to your.
No, Amazon. No, you buy on Amazon. You would buy it from Amazon.
Really?
But Lakefront Anonymous, that link, which I'll put in here just so that people have it. Now I actually have to put on my reading glasses so you can see that.
Okay, yeah. do that, because I think I did that in some of our publicity.
Yeah, no, and it's,
And
and it's,
one thing I would like to mention here, and I'm absolutely struck by the fact that all of this art is disappearing, is the fact that we have in the audience tonight Joe Marlin, who spent a good part of his life documenting billboards and advertising in Chicago on buildings that also has been lost. And Joe, I just want to recognize the fact that you are doing similar work to what Bill Swisslow is doing here. And so that's another program that we had that I would like to recognize Joe Marlin's work in the area of preserving what is not normally thought of as art, but in fact is, whether it's advertisement or lakefront carvings. And I think that's what the Historical Society is all about. So I really want to thank both of you.
let me say that Joe and I share that interest. Before I did the lakefront carvings, one of my projects was, and it's still going on, is documenting every Gyro sign I can find in Chicago and actually anywhere I travel. So yeah, and Joe and I have had some contact where we both share that interest in signage, because on my website I have hundreds and hundreds of signs as well, which was an interest earlier than the lakefront carvings.
Thank you, Michael, for your comments, and I did have a copy of the book fairly early because, as Bill knows, I wrote a review for an organization that called the Society for Commercial Archaeology, of which he's an officer. But I've never met you in person, so I hope by this in a couple of weeks, or rather not more than a couple, at the end of May, when this Promontory event is, I'll have a chance to meet you then.
Yeah, I hope so. I look forward to that.
All right.
So there are
we've
some
got a
questions
couple.
in the chat. I don't know how you run this.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill, and address them as you see them.
So Morgan Shoal is actually a shoal that's offshore. And I don't know how long it's been called Morgan Shoal. I mean, I think some people who grew up in the area, might know it as Pebble Beach. But I've been calling it Morgan Shoal, and that seems to be the name that's sticking these days. But it's an actual shoal. It's where that shipwreck is out there. You just can't see it because the water's so high. Someone asked about the tools. So as I say, as far as everyone I've talked to has basically, I mean, I haven't talked to that many people, but the few carvers I've been able to talk to, it's basically been hammers and chisels, like just ordinary, the tools you'd find in the basement. And as I say, I think that the carver of the Mayan carvings at Foster Beach, my memory is that he was using like a big, heavy, very heavy, like spike or nail. So just hand tools. And the ones who carved the mermaid, I mean, they were not using powered tools out there because there was no power. And in those days, you didn't have like good battery powered power tools. So, they just used hand tools. The limestone is soft, is a relatively soft rock. So it's not that hard to carve with. I think that some of the places where you just see like a few letters carved in the rock, they might have even used keys, like just, while they're sitting there, go at the rock with keys. Nothing elaborate. So what else about the Big Mermaid do people want to know? I mean,
I just want to know something about the artist who made it. You have his picture in the book, and you met him, I guess. Yeah. So there's Roman Villarreal who lives on the far south side in that Steeltown area. Who, as I say, is very active in the sort of the community arts world down there. Excuse me. But he's done lots of stone carvings, and eventually did a lot of commissions for the Park District. If you go to Steelworkers Park, there's actually a bronze statue that he made. So he doesn't just work in stone, but that was his original material. and he still does stone carvings, lots of stone carvings, but he paints, he makes sculpture. I mean, he's an interesting guy, very articulate, very eloquent. He's been getting some attention lately because he is so active in the arts community there in the far south side. And then the other stone carver was a carver from Mexico. And the Mexican guy, Roman told me, specialized in nudes, in nude women. And Roman was a little leery of that. So they settled on doing a mermaid because Roman figured you could get away with nudity if it was a mermaid. So that's why they did a mermaid. And then, they had a couple helpers who were not stone carvers, but were, one was a jewelry maker and one was an artist. I think one of them might still be alive. Jose Moreno, the other stone carver, is gone, as is one of the other guys. But Roman is still very active. Interesting guy. Well worth. If you see articles that mention him, it's well worth reading them. He's quite eloquent.
Jack, I think your hand was up earlier. You have to unmute yourself.
I did. Thank you, Michael. Bill, this is a great project, and I thank you especially for your attention to Promontory Point. I wanted to add one thing, that most of the blocks at Belmont and Diversey weren't just thrown away. They were crushed and pulverized at what we referred to as Mount Waveland at the time, to use in the concrete construction. So it was actually even more sad than just throwing them away, because they are now long gone, turned into gravel.
Yeah, it's just, well, we all know what most of us think about that. And, the fate of those blocks, it gets me when you see sections where they've done work on the park along the lake, and they've bought new blocks, like new concrete blocks, rather than reusing these beautiful limestone blocks that always look better than these new pieces of concrete. But
Bill, one other thing about Morgan Shoal, actually that's a rare place where the bedrock, which is almost 60 to 90 feet underneath at the loop, comes almost to the surface. There's another part along the Kennedy at what's Wrigley Field? What's the cross street of Wrigley Field? Anyway, on the west side of the Kennedy at Addison, you can see that bedrock at the surface there also. So it's an unusual situation at Morgan Shoal, where the bedrock comes almost to the surface.
Well, doesn't it it always looked to me like that might be true about south of La Rabida Hospital, but I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if that's the case or not, but there's, flat, just looks like natural rock that wasn't originally the lakefront, because you can see the revetments are out in the water. There's old revetments, but inland of that, there's like flat, expansive flat rock, but I'm not sure what the geological story there is.
So Bill, Robin Kaufman has her hand raised for a question. Robin?
Okay, first I think that, I had another question, but in response to the thing about near La Rabida, I think initially it was flat with rocks, and then now some of them moved up. So I think the beach had rocks. If we were to go looking at either Morgan Shoal or the Point, how long would we have to look before we would find some?
Oh, looking for, well,
the artwork.
It's a good question.
And if you had any recommendations on, what level would we want to be at?
Well, first of all, I would advise against Morgan Shoal unless you're an adventure climber. I mean, I'm no spring chicken, and I feel like an idiot when I'm climbing over the rocks there to try to find the carvings, because I'm convinced I will, if I'm not careful, break my leg one of these days. That's a little dicey. Promontory Point obviously is a lot better. I mean, the easiest way to find them will be to join one of these walking tours I'm going to give at the end of May. Otherwise you have to look down, right? Most people when they're at the lake are not looking down. They sort of start those bathing beauties, and that one Betty Grable type figure is pretty visible. It's right on the edge of the lake. That's at the the southwest corner. The thing about Promontory Point, though, is that unlike some of these other sites like La Rabida and Foster Beach, the carvings aren't as dense at the point. They're kind of stretched out around it. I mean, there are like more than 150 carvings there. And so, you know, again, a lot of these carvings are just people's names. But it's not like I can say, go to this spot and you'll see a ton of carvings. They're just kind of all stretched out. But if you look, you'll probably start seeing them once you know they're there. And they're, you know, the one that's easiest to find is probably the Here Adolf Lies. This is Susie's tomb, because that's a huge rock. It's on the north side, and it's you know, probably halfway from, you know, the east end of the west. It's probably like right in the middle of the revetments there. But that's a little harder to get around that area because the rocks there are in worse shape. So, you know, that's the challenge. But, you know, I actually created a little map, a little cheat sheet. I could email it after this, that has more or less where some of the carvings are, at least in some locations. But I don't know if that would be helpful or not. Because like I say, they're not always
Bill,
easy to see.
Yeah, Bill, in advance of your tours on the 28th and 29th and our program on the history of the Promontory Point on the 29th, why don't you send that to me and I'll include that in our publicity
Okay.
to encourage
I don't
people
know how
to.
helpful it will be to anyone else, but you may not want to include it in your publicity, but maybe privately circulate it. It may not be like ready for the world, if you know what I mean. I just did it for my own
Yeah, sure.
purposes. Because
Sure.
I will
send
tell
it
you,
on.
I'll send it on. I will tell you, like, I mean, I live near Foster Avenue Beach. I walk my dog there two or three times a week, and I will still walk right when I'm giving walking tours. I can still walk right by a carving and not notice it. Some of it is, a lot of it depends on the lighting. If you don't have the right lighting, the carvings can be very hard to see. So if you do want to go out and hunt for carvings, go out in the morning. You know, the earlier the better when you're getting more of a side light than an overhead light. But on a shady day, you're not going to, on a cloudy day, it's going to be hard to see them at all. For if you don't know they're there, it can be very hard to see.
Okay, well, we'll work on that coming up. I see a question from Mallory Price in the chat. Do you know if there's anywhere that has used art to prevent erosion on shorelines? Just wondering.
I think it's unique to Chicago.
What?
Like I say, I think it's unique to Chicago. Not that they intended to use art, but I think it turned into art. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I think it's a great thought.
I'm not sure how successful it's been, given the stories you've been telling about how much stuff has been destroyed, but
I will say, in defense of the Army Corps and those, no one I mean, there was no awareness. There was like basically zero awareness that these existed, with a few exceptions, like the landscape architect at Fullerton, God bless her. You know, I don't think Tom Tunney was, I mean, he saved some carvings, but I think he was out there because of the sort of community paintings, the social content of the paintings. So, you know, if no one knows they're there, then yeah. Now, there's no excuse for throwing away the quarry stones. I think Jack's point is well taken. Pulverizing them is wrong. I think we have a raised hand from Robin.
Oh, no, that was a mistake.
Mallory.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. I wanted to know, so like when I was saying about the art, like other places will use like break walls that they like put further out so that it's not like blocking access to the actual lake, like the beach for people. I'm just like wondering if anyone knows, why don't we do that? Or like, could we get a grant, or like, could the city get a grant or give money? So then that is like a piece of art as well. I don't know. But like, I don't understand why we don't put like break walls or something like further out.
No, you're right. And in fact, Calumet Park Calumet Park is one of the best preserved, is the best preserved of the old revetments. And I believe it's because the old US Steel, there's a breakwater there that was built, I'm sure, for the US Steel plant that protects Calumet Park. The breakwaters are very effective. Well, the other answer to that from our point of view, I think, is that in the original Burnham plan, there were going to be these islands built offshore. And even in later plans, I know in Edgewater where I live, there was a proposal to build islands offshore that would have done the same thing, that would have added parkland and protected the shoreline. But the depression, they were too expensive. And I think that's the answer to your question about breakwaters, is no one wants to step up with the money to do that. But that would be, that's an obvious solution and it works, but you got to value the shoreline in order to want to spend that money. And given the city's attitude towards Promontory Point, this current regime doesn't value the current state of the shoreline the way it needs to.
Thank you.
So someone asked about other walking tours. I give a fair number of walking tours, usually at Foster Avenue Beach, because it's very, very accessible. And actually I have one scheduled. There is going to be one coming up June 4th that I'm doing for Intuit, the Intuit Museum. So if you're interested in seeing the carvings at Foster Beach, and there are really great carvings there, as some of them I showed, you can certainly sign up for that carving. For that tour. I don't know if they have the information on their website yet, but that will be coming up June 4th. I publicize walking tours if they're public tours on my Facebook page. But a lot of these tours are for, groups but like the Promontory Point ones, I'll be publicizing as well. I think your publicity will be more effective than mine, however.
Right. Well, as soon as we have all the details, certainly we'll publish that. It's shaping up to be a wonderful weekend in Hyde Park and on Promontory Point. So do we have any other questions for Bill? All right, well.
Yeah, one other thing, just to complete a thought about the islands plan. Had they built, so there was a proposal in the early 30s to build these islands, as I say, like between Montrose Avenue and Devon Avenue. And had they built those, the Edgewater Beach Hotel may have survived, because it would have left the Edgewater Beach Hotel at the edge of the water. And one of the reasons it closed was because when they extended Lakeshore Drive, they basically took away the waterfront from the Edgewater Beach Hotel. And so when you see these plans, like Jack mentioned with Promontory Point, it's just heartbreaking, to think if these had been built. I mean, we have this incredible lakefront today, and had these islands been built, it would have been twice as incredible, basically. But so it goes. Anyways, that's enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I suggest, William, that on one of your tours, you equip everybody with chisels and hammers. And you all go out and find the rock you want, and see to it that you record the people that are out and appreciate it, including your own name, William. Bye-bye.
It's a great idea.
Thank you, Sam. We will take that under advisement and see if the Promontory Point Conservancy can move to chisels and hammers. Jack? Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, I think we have a wonderful summer coming up here. I mean, we've got the Promontory Point, International Promontory Point Day coming up, with the tours by both Jack and Bill of Promontory Point and the revetments. And on behalf of the Hyde Park Book Club, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. I think it's been a wonderful evening. I just want to mention a couple of things that we have coming up in the next few weeks, one of which is by Don Turner, Three Girls from Bronzeville, which is a really wonderful memoir of three girls from Bronzeville. I mean, the title says it all. Coming up, that is going to be our May book club. Our June book club is called Chicago Beer, History of Brewing, Public Drinking, and the Corner Bar. And for this one, we're going to go public. We're going to go in person again. And we have talked to the owner of Jimmy's Woodlawn Tap, who has agreed to host us that night. So Chicago Beer is going to be hosted in a Chicago bar. So that will be our June book club meeting. And finally, in July, we have Betty Heckman doing Murder, Inc., which will be in our headquarters. A mystery story set in Hyde Park. So, and by the way, our book club is actually booked through October of this year. So we've got other exciting programs coming up, but as I want to thank Bill again, and we so look forward to International Promontory Point Day and your tours of the point and Jack's tours of the point. It's wonderful seeing you all, and I think we're done for tonight. Any
Thank you.
last comments?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night,
Good to see
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Jean.